5 or 6 when I first discovered that I was an accomplice to murder. It was my first and last fishing trip on the family pontoon boat in Minnesota. The loons were warbling their sweet song. The birch trees glowed white against the lush, verdant banks of the Mississippi River, and I watched in horror as my dad and 2 older brothers threaded their hooks with writhing earthworms and one by one jerked an unsuspecting northern pike out of his or her safe watery home onto the blue pontoon deck where each one flopped, gasped, choked, and died before my eyes. I stared gape-mouthed at these murderers I called family. What's the matter with you people? My mom sat casually reading a book and smoking her cigarette while all this was going on, as though nothing was wrong, as though there wasn't a fish holocaust happening this very moment on her pleasure boat. So I picked up a fish, gouged out both its eyeballs, and proceeded to chase my family members about the boat with them. Crying out in my best zombie fish voice, "You killed my mother! How could you do this to me?" And my parents actually got mad at me for this. Why is it okay to torture and kill innocent creatures, skewering them alive under the false pretense of offering them a meal, but not okay to make puppets out of fish eyeballs? What kind of planet was I living in? From that day on, every time I ate my dad's yummy spaghetti with meat sauce, or mouth-watering chicken tandoori, or to die for oyster beef, I felt the guilt like a hook through my own mouth. Bad Eliza. Bad Eliza. And the betrayal. I would look down at the delectable morsels of dead cow on my plate, and then look up at the faces of the killers I called parents. How could they have led me down this path? They're good people. I loved and admired them, and they'd betrayed me for my entire life. I tried to do the math in my little 7-year-old head, multiplying 365 dinners by 7 years and trying to reconstruct the number of cows, chickens, pigs, fish, and bunnies I may have been responsible for killing. And worst of all, I found each and every one of the cute little suckers fucking delicious. My karmic debt was overwhelming, but the food was so good. When I had my own kids, I fumed. I would make sure meat never became their go-to comfort food as it was for me. I wanted to control my culinary destiny and surround myself with like-minded individuals who lived in humane harmony with the earth and all of her creatures. And one of the fucked up things about being 7 is that you have no control over any of that. Inspiration finally came to me in the form of the Swedish chef. Yes, come up. He was the only chef I'd ever seen other than my dad, and from this, I jumped to the conclusion that cooking was a guy thing, and I needed to rebel. So I would become a chef, despite the fact that I was a girl. And in total ignorance of the fact that many women happen to be chefs. But no matter, finally, I would be in control of what I was eating. I saved my money from working at the children's zoo and local vet, cleaning up steamy white pit bull puke for $3.35 an hour, to buy vegetarian ingredients. Sometimes I even got my brothers to eat my chickpea curry instead of Dad's meat entree and like it. Victory! Once in college, like any good self-proclaimed vegan activist, I joined Greenpeace, People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, and I became the vegetarian chef at the UCLA Co-op on Thursdays. I figured if I made a meal so delicious that 200 meat eaters would willingly choose the vegetarian option that day, I'd earned myself a hamburger. Hey, this wasn't about some holier-than-thou vegetarian vanity. This was about saving the world, one chicken at a time. I would go home for the holidays and shame-eat my dad's turkey, and then come back to school and try to make up for it with 300 of the world's best veggie burgers. But it wasn't enough to quiet the voice in my head that told me over and over again I was a fraud and a hypocrite and a murderer and didn't deserve friends. I had rejected the mainstream, but my guilty little secret kept me from getting close with the do-gooders I'd picked as my people. My vegan hubris hit its peak in 1993 when I was starring on a kids show called Beekman's World. This was my opportunity to influence the hearts and minds of children in 60 countries and finally make up for all the animals I'd killed with my meat-loving ways. I insisted that my character only wear Converse high tops, no leather shoes, and I wrote to my little fans about the values of veganism. I would start a children's vegan movement. But with great power comes great responsibility. In my megalomania, it occurred to me that I had to remove all temptation. Otherwise, 60 million children might discover what a hypocrite I was every time I swiped a piece of pot roast off the craft services table. What about the paparazzi? That I didn't have yet, but maybe one day could. I had to become the vegan tank girl, so I dropped off the grid. I moved out of the co-op and into a converted ambulance, where I attempted to surround myself with only humane products, biodegradable soaps and shampoos, Tom's of Maine toothpaste, and nut butter. But what about the leather upholstery and the fuel? No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't rid myself of the tarnish of so-called civilized society. I'd become a vegan obsessed, eating her own tail, and I missed the company of other humans. Begging the goddess to imbue me with the powers of manifestation. Yes, there was a goddess now. I posted an index card on the Laurel Canyon Country Store billboard. Single white female looking for my own fully enclosed studio for $6.50 a month, with parking in the canyon, attached to a house full of vegetarians, with a cat I can play with but don't have to take care of, and a jacuzzi. A month later, I got the call. We saw your ad. We want you to come live with us. It was a very Mary Poppins meets Jane and Michael Banks moment. Certainly no one had actually seen the card I posted. Certainly such a dream pad didn't exist. I pulled up in front of the 3-story marble mountaintop mansion covered in fairy tale vines on Wonderland Avenue. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and was greeted by the looming figure of an impossibly skinny, impossibly tanned young man named Giuliano. Welcome to the House of Raw, where raw is the law. Wonderland is a lush and winding street in Laurel Canyon where both Jim Morrison and Charles Manson were said to have wreaked their respective brands of havoc. The place had history. I could only assume this lean fellow literally meant this was a place where they worshipped the ancient Egyptian sun god Ra. I could get into that, but I was so very wrong. Turns out these people were not just vegetarians, not even vegans, no. They were raw, as in raw food. No meat in the house, no cheese. Never heat anything over 118 degrees, except, of course, marijuana. None of them seemed to question the heating process involved in producing the MDMA they swallowed on a weekly basis. But I guess those got a pass because they weren't technically food. In the House of Raw, not only was meat murder, but milk was pussy bovine hormone juice. You barbarian. And cheese, pussy congealed bovine hormone juice. And I bought into that philosophy hook, line, and sinker. Here, I could be part of the solution. Giuliano embodied my ideal, a man who lived the purity I wanted to achieve. Plus, it was a sweet pad. I drank the raw Kool-Aid. We did naked yoga on the roof. I bought the idea that guacamole in and of itself was a substantial dinner. But they never truly accepted me. Giuliano would always say, Eliza lives in the lowest chakra of the house. Meaning the red marble basement, because they knew I was still cooking downstairs in my wok. My veggie pad thai and cashew curry did not fly at the House of Raw. It was cooked. Dead food. I did yoga, but they were yogis, and they considered me entirely uncivilized. I was sure it was clear to them that I was going through horrible withdrawal, wanting to kill everyone around me to substitute for the fish I wasn't eating. I couldn't pretend I wasn't bothered now that the clothing optional but not encouraged jacuzzi was surrounded by a lush green bed of poison oak. That the cat, so cute, pissed on everything. And that smell, combined with the popular stinky fruit and rotting food left sitting out on the countertops, sprouting, day in and day out, mitigated any sense of fresh air the wooded canyon might afford. Then, just in case I had been too afraid to initiate the breakup myself, while I was balancing on the roof in downward-facing dog, reaching around to scratch the sunburned poison oak on my bare left butt cheek, with no sustenance in my bloodstream save sprouted seeds and a little residual THC, I looked across Wonderland Avenue and saw Giuliano being loaded into the back of a cop car. He was charged with having raped the teenage German model living in the indigo marble highest chakra of the house, after providing her with ample cocaine. It occurred to me that these raw yogis might be projecting an outwardly pristine existence in that inversely reflected a deeply fucked up interior. I felt betrayed, disgusted, outraged, sick. I wanted to kill Giuliano with my small, bare pacifist hands. I needed food. I cooked my first chicken breast in years that night, right in the House of Raw, and it felt great. I realized in eating that chicken that I was satisfying my bloodlust for Giuliano, and suddenly my life of transgressions felt less heavy. I was able to forgive myself, accept my cravings as something other than imperfection, and move the fuck out of the House of Raw. These days, I consider myself a recovering vegetarian. I try to eat a little more meat every day. Sometimes I fall off the wagon and go on a tofu bender. But I've come to understand that the occasional free-range organic chicken is like my own personal Jesus, dying for my sins. I embrace my own dark side by ingesting it. The bloodier, the better. What completely tipped the meat scales was pregnancy. I craved blood of animal like some sort of rotund flesh-eating zombie. And I was okay with that. I kept enough lefty leanings to still opt for a natural childbirth, no drugs, no epidural, and by hour 21 of labor, and hour 3 of pushing on an empty stomach, I knew I'd accepted how fully I am an omnivore. You are what you eat, and I was a hot, bloody mess. My holistic, all-natural midwife smiles at me near the end. Okay, sweetie, all you have to do now is push out the placenta and we're all done. I glare at her, starving, and push one last time. An otherworldly jellyfish of gore spills onto the bed, and I look her right in the eye and ask, are you gonna eat that?
Eliza Schneider, everybody, and her placenta.